I never imagined I would ever see the inside of a prison cell. The cell walls were cold and unyielding, but they weren't as suffocating as the life I used to live. I had become a prisoner long before I ended up here, trapped in a marriage that slowly strangled the life out of me. I sighed and sniffed back the tears that were already welling up in my eyes as I remembered the first day I met him. I was born in a poor family, one of the many struggling families in the ghettos of Lagos. My father wasn't always around, and it was just me, my younger sister, and my wicked stepmother. She was very strict and never showed any love or care to me. She always makes me do the hardest chores in the house while she spoils her own daughter. Every day, I had to hawk food for my stepmother. I would carry a tray of food on my head and walk for hours in the busy market under the scorching sun, hoping to sell all the food. It was very exhausting, but I didn't have any choice. I knew what would happen if I didn't bring any money home. One afternoon, as I was walking through the crowded streets with my food tray balanced on my head, a motorcycle came out of nowhere, speeding through the busy market. Before I could even step aside, the rider hit me hard and knocked me on the ground. My tray flew from my head, and the food scattered all over the road. The rider didn't even stop to check on me. He just zoomed off. The people in the market looked at me pitifully while some kind ones helped me up. I stood there in the market, stunned and helpless. My heart sank as I thought about what I was going to tell my stepmother. I couldn't imagine the beating and punishments I was about to get. With no food, no money, and no way to explain myself, I slowly made my way home. My legs felt very heavy with each step, and my eyes had already swollen from crying. I was just about to enter the house when I saw my stepmother coming out of the house. "Where are my plates and where is my money?" she asked angrily. I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. Filled with anger, she slapped me hard across the face. "You useless child," she screamed. "You wasted my food and spent all my money. Go back and don't you dare come back without my money." I could hardly believe it. My stepmother had sent me out over something I couldn't control. My heart was broken. How do I get the money and where do I sleep tonight? I had no one to turn to. I wandered the streets for 2 whole days, trying to survive. At first, I tried to beg for food and money, but people just ignored me, or they gave me a disgusted look. I felt so ashamed. But I couldn't give up, I had to survive. Then, just when I started losing hope, a car stopped in front of me. And a young man stepped out of the car. He looked at me with pity, and for a moment, I thought he was going to ignore me like everyone else. But instead, he asked, "Are you hungry?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He smiled and said, "Come with me. I'll get you something to eat." Before I knew it, we were in a restaurant, and the waiter was bringing me food. I hadn't eaten like this in days. I ate hungrily, savoring each bite while the man watched me. I couldn't believe this was happening. After the meal, he gave me a reasonable amount of money before he left. I didn't know what to say. Who was this man and why was he being so kind to me? I didn't want to go back home and give my stepmom the money because even if I did, she won't still be satisfied, and I didn't want to go back and work as a slave for her since she didn't care to know about my welfare. With the money the man gave me, I started hawking fruits. I chose something simple, something I could manage on my own. I found a spot near a bridge where I could sleep at night. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. One afternoon, as I was busy hawking my fruits, I saw the same man again. He smiled at me and was surprised to see me still out there. "Why are you hawking fruits?" he asked gently. "You should be doing something better." I looked down at the ground, feeling embarrassed. I then explained to him that I was chased out of the house by my stepmother. "I don't have anywhere else to stay and I don't know what else to do," I said quietly. The man thought for a moment, and then said something that changed my life forever. "Come stay with my sister then. She lives in my other house." I couldn't believe my ears. He wanted me to live with his sister. A stranger like me. I was skeptical at first, but the kindness in his eyes told me he wasn't like anyone else I had met before. So I agreed. His sister's house was nothing like anything I had ever seen. It was big and beautiful, with rooms that were clean and comfortable. The sister, whose name was Amanda, welcomed me warmly and made me feel at home without acknowledging the fact that I was a poor and homeless stranger. She showed me my room, bought me expensive clothes, wigs, shoes, bags, toiletries, and everything I needed to feel safe and cared for. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I mattered. I felt like I was living in a dream. I had my own room, soft blankets, and a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds. The man and his sister were very kind to me, giving me everything I needed without ever asking for anything in return. Over the next few weeks, my life began to change for good. I started to look different, healthier, happier, and even more beautiful. The stress and hunger from the streets were gone, replaced with peace and comfort. Amanda took her time to dress me and fix my nails and lashes. She also taught me how to do my makeup and style my wigs, something I had never done before. Amanda took me out to restaurants, to shops, and to places I never thought I would see. It was like a whole new world opened up to me. One afternoon, the man whose name was Fred came to the house. He hadn't seen me since the day he brought me here. When he saw me, he was stunned and speechless. "You look amazing, Susan," he said in admiration. I blushed, feeling a mix of joy and disbelief. I told him that if it weren't for him and his sister, I wouldn't have changed for good. "I'm glad we could help you," he said. Soon, Fred began to show me more affection. He would surprise me with gifts, beautiful clothes, sparkling jewelry, and even a car. He would take me on dates to fancy places, and I felt like I was living a life I had only dreamed about. The girl who once hawked food on the streets now had everything she could ask for. Then, one evening, Fred sat me down at the veranda of the house and asked me something that made my heart skip a beat. "Susan," he said softly, "I've been thinking about us a lot. I love you. I want you to be with me. Will you be my girlfriend?" I was stunned. Me? A girl who had come from nothing, now being asked to be with a man like Fred. I couldn't believe it. I knew I loved him too. I had never felt so cared for and protected in my life. So, with a smile, I nodded and said, "Yes, Fred. I love you too." From that moment, everything seemed perfect. Fred treated me like a queen. We went on lavish trips, dined at the best restaurants, and I met his friends and his mother. Everyone seemed to like me, and I started to make friends with influential people in the city. I felt like I was on top of the world. My past, the long days of hunger and hardship, felt so far away. When Amanda got to know about my relationship with her brother, she was also very happy. She said that she knew it was going to happen anytime soon. I also moved into his own house after some weeks of dating. His own house was as beautiful as the other one. When Fred and I talked about our future, he told me he wanted to marry me. In 2 weeks' time, we would be getting married. I felt as if I was rushing into the marriage because we just started dating 2 months ago. But I didn't voice out my feelings seeing how he was talking happily about the wedding. My life had already changed so much in such a short time. And I was glad that everything was finally falling into place, so I gave him my consent to continue with the marriage plans. But then, a week before the wedding, something strange happened. It was late at night. I had just woken up feeling a bit pressed, so I rushed into the toilet. When I came back to the room, I noticed that Fred was nowhere to be seen in the room. I felt a little confused. I didn't check him before entering the toilet because I was so pressed and had to rush into the toilet. But it was unlike him to leave the room at night, especially so late. I searched the house, calling his name quietly. But there was no answer. I went to the living room, the kitchen, and even the study, but still, no sign of him. My heart started racing. Where could he have gone at this time of the night? When I went back to our room, something caught my eye. His phone was lying on the bed, next to the pillow, blinking. I picked it up, staring at the screen, unsure of what to do. My fingers hovered over the screen. I had never looked at his phone before, but something about the way it was left there, blinking at me, made me feel uneasy. Just as I was about to put it down, the door opened. Fred walked in, his face immediately hardened when he saw me holding his phone. "What are you doing with my phone?" he demanded. His voice was loud and sharp. I was caught off guard. I was just curious. It was blinking, and I thought something might have happened. Fred's face darkened even further. Without warning, he marched over to me, slapped me hard across the cheek, and snatched the phone from my hand. "Don't touch my phone again for any reason," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. He glared at me for a moment, then turned and left the room, slamming the door behind him. My cheek burned from the slap, and my heart ached. I stood there, shaking, not understanding what had just happened. Why was he so angry, and why didn't he listen to my own side of the story? I felt a deep pain in my chest. The man who had been so kind to me, the one I thought I could trust with everything, had just treated me like I was nothing. My world seemed to shatter in that moment, and I couldn't understand why. I sat down on the bed, my hands trembling. The dream I had been living now felt like a nightmare. What had just happened? What was Fred hiding? That morning, Fred came to meet me in the room, looking sorrowful. I was surprised but still pained. He gently held my hands, his face full of regret. "Susan, I'm so sorry for what happened last night," he said softly. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a sparkling diamond necklace, carefully placing it around my neck. "Please, forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt you. I got a little carried away." I looked into his eyes, feeling a swirl of emotions. Part of me was still hurt, but another part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the love we had, so I nodded and accepted his apology. Things went back to normal, and I convinced myself that maybe it was just a one-time thing. After all, I loved him. For days before our wedding, I was packing my things to head to the hotel where I'd stay for my bridal shower and the days leading up to the wedding ceremony. As I was pulling out clothes from the wardrobe, a white envelope slipped out from under a pile of clothes. I stared at it for a moment, feeling my curiosity grow. Carefully, I picked up the envelope. It was sealed and had nothing written on the outside. Something about it felt strange. I thought about ignoring it, but I couldn't help myself. I mustered some courage and tore open the seal, pulling out a small paper. To my surprise, the note was almost entirely blank, except for 3 red dots in the center of the page. I frowned, puzzled. What could this mean? Why would Fred keep a blank note with just 3 dots? I thought about asking him, but something in my gut told me to put it back. So, I slipped the note back into the envelope and tucked it right where I found it. After packing my things, I headed downstairs to meet my close friends who will be my bridesmaids. They had just arrived. They greeted me with big smiles, hugging me and talking excitedly about the wedding. I felt my spirits lift as we laughed and chatted, and for a moment, I forgot about the strange note. Then after a while, I saw Fred coming down the stairs. But he didn't look happy, his face was twisted with anger. He stormed toward me, and before I could even say hello, he shouted, "Why were you touching my things, Susan?" I was caught off guard again, not understanding what he was talking about at first. I was just packing for the hotel, I stammered, feeling the blood drain from my face. Fred's eyes burned with fury. Don't lie to me. You went through my things. Before I could defend myself, he lunged forward, his hands raised, and in front of my friends, he hit me, over and over. I could hear gasps and cries from my bridesmaids as they tried to pull him off me, but his rage was too strong. The room started to spin, and I felt myself sinking into darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by the faint beeps of machines. My head throbbed, and every part of my body felt sore. I slowly turned to see Amanda and some of my friends all sitting beside my bed looking worried. Their faces were full of relief as they noticed that I was awake. "Susan!" Amanda exclaimed, gently hugging me. "We were so worried about you." Tears filled my eyes, and before I could stop myself, I started sobbing. The confusion, the pain, the heartbreak, it all came flooding out. Amanda held my hand, waiting for me to calm down. "Susan, you'll be fine. I heard what happened. I'm so sorry for what my brother did to you. Please forgive him," she said, her eyes full of concern. I shook my head, unable to find the words. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. Why was Fred acting this way? Why did he have such a quick temper? And what was he hiding? Amanda then looked at me seriously. "Listen, Susan. If you're not comfortable with Fred and his character, you don't have to go through with the wedding. You can cancel it." I stared at her, her words sinking in. Cancel the wedding? Part of me knew she was right. Fred's violent outbursts were scaring me, and I wasn't sure what he was hiding or why he was so angry. But I loved him, I loved the Fred I thought I knew. As Amanda spoke softly to me, trying to reassure me, I heard footsteps approaching. Fred walked into the ward, holding a bouquet of flowers. His face looked sad, and he came straight to my bedside. "Susan," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I can't believe I hurt you like that." He took my hand gently, his eyes pleading. "Please forgive me. I swear, I never lay a finger on you again." He looked at me with such regret, and for a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to forget everything that had happened and go back to the way things were. But deep inside, a tiny voice warned me. Something wasn't right with Fred. Something dark and hidden lay beneath his charming smile. Despite the doubts and warnings in my heart, I decided to forgive Fred, hoping we could truly move forward. And, just like that, things went back to normal. The bridal shower was beautiful, filled with laughter and love from my friends. 2 days later, we stood before family and friends, exchanging vows, though deep down, I couldn't shake the odd feeling that something wasn't right. Still, I pushed those worries aside, telling myself that I was just overthinking. Our honeymoon in Paris felt like a fairy tale. Fred was affectionate, attentive, and so charming. He took me to the finest restaurants, bought me beautiful gifts, and held my hand everywhere we went. I felt cherished, as if every doubt had been washed away. The man I fell in love with had returned, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd made the right choice. For 3 wonderful weeks, I let myself bask in the happiness. I forgot all the bruises, the anger and the strange note with the red dots. I told myself those moments were behind us. When we finally returned to Lagos, life seemed perfect. Fred was sweet and gentle, and I felt grateful every day. I even thanked God that he had kept his promise and become a changed man. I loved him, and I was thrilled to see our life unfolding together. Everything felt right. Months passed, and the happiness continued. Then, one day, I got some news that changed everything. I was pregnant. I couldn't wait to tell Fred, imagining how excited he would be. I pictured him lifting me up in joy, the two of us planning our future as parents. With a happy heart, I told him the news that evening, expecting him to smile and hug me. But his face didn't light up. In fact, it darkened, a shadow falling over his features. "Fred, did you hear me?" I asked, my voice laced with confusion. "We are going to have a baby." He looked at me coldly, his expression unreadable. "I heard you, Susan," he replied flatly. "But I'm not ready for that. This wasn't part of the plan." I stared at him, stunned. I had expected joy, maybe even tears of happiness. But this? I couldn't understand why he would react this way. Fred's words hit me like a punch in the gut. I stood there, frozen, staring at him, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. "Not part of the plan," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "But Fred, we are married. A baby is a blessing, isn't it? I thought you'd be happy." He looked away, his jaw clenched. It's too soon. I'm not ready to be a father. I have things I need to take care of first. You should think about getting rid of it." My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You mean, you want me to?" "Yes," he cut me off sharply, his face hard. "I don't have time for this right now, Susan. I can't deal with a baby. Not now. It would only complicate things." Tears sprang to my eyes, and I took a step back, feeling like I was sinking into a nightmare. "Fred, this is our child. How could you even suggest that?" He sighed heavily, sounding almost impatient. "I thought you understood, Susan. You knew how I am, how much I value control in my life. This wasn't supposed to happen." I felt my whole world crumbling as he spoke. The warmth, the affection he'd shown me over the last few months, it all felt like a lie now. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to make him see how heartless he was being. But I could only stare at him, feeling lost. Fred's face softened a bit as he noticed my tears. He reached out to touch my shoulder. "Listen, I'm not trying to hurt you. It's just that, having a child wasn't in my plan, at least not now. I'm asking you to do this for me. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I pulled away from his touch, shaking my head. "I need some time to think," I whispered, feeling sick to my stomach. Fred nodded curtly. "Fine. Take all the time you need. But remember what's at stake here, Susan. This is a serious decision." I turned and walked away, heading upstairs to our bedroom. Once inside, I closed the door and sank onto the bed, clutching my stomach. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process everything. How could the man I loved, the man I had forgiven and chosen to marry, ask me to give up our child so coldly? In that moment, a creeping fear began to take root in my heart. There was something deeply wrong with Fred, something hidden that I hadn't seen before. I wrestled with my thoughts, feeling torn between the man I thought I loved and the tiny life growing inside me. Despite Fred's cold words, I knew in my heart I couldn't do what he asked. When I finally told him my decision, standing as firm as I could, his face darkened. "Fine," he said, his voice like ice. "Keep the baby. But be ready for the consequences." After that, it was like a switch had flipped. Fred became a different person overnight. He stopped talking to me unless he absolutely had to, and when he did, his words were clipped and cold. He wouldn't even look at me as he sat down to eat the meals I'd cook. Days stretched into weeks, and the silence between us felt heavier with each passing day. One afternoon, I met up with Amanda and poured out everything. I told her how Fred's attitude had changed because I refused to do what he asked, how he was acting like a stranger in his own home. "Maybe there's more to this than he's telling you," Amanda suggested, looking worried. "Have you tried calmly asking him why he's so against this baby? Her words made sense. I needed to try, even if I feared his reaction. That evening, I approached Fred after dinner, my heart pounding in my chest. "Fred," I began softly, "can we talk?" He barely glanced at me, his face stony. "About what?" "About us," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I just don't understand why you don't want this baby. I'd like to know why. Please talk to me." But Fred didn't even blink. He looked right through me, as if I were invisible, then stood up and walked out of the room without a word. Anger and hurt surged through me. But more than that, I felt a new sense of determination. If he wouldn't talk to me, if he wouldn't share what was going on, then I was going to raise this baby on my own, no matter what. But Fred's behavior only got worse from there. He began staying out late, coming back reeking of alcohol, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes bloodshot. One night, he brought a group of his friends home with him, and they partied in the living room until dawn. Bottles, cigarette butts, and food wrappers littered the floor, and the house was a mess. I tried to confront him, to ask him why he was acting like this, but he brushed me off, laughing it away. Then came the night he brought a group of women home from the club. They danced and smoked in the living room while I sat in the bedroom, feeling more like a stranger in my own home than ever. Days later, I met up with Amanda again, desperate to make sense of what was happening. "You were right, Amanda," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I don't know who I married. He's not the man I thought he was." Amanda's face filled with concern. "Susan, you know I warned you, but I'm so sorry it turned out like this. I just can't believe he's treating you this way. Do you think there's something he's hiding from you?" I nodded slowly. "I don't know. I feel like he has this dark side I never saw before. But he won't let me close enough to figure it out." The days dragged on, each one worse than the last. Fred's coldness became unbearable, his late nights and house parties turning our once peaceful home into a chaotic mess. I spent my days cleaning up after his friends, trying to create some sense of normalcy for myself and the child growing inside me. But with every passing day, I started to feel something else, which is regret. The tension in the house had been suffocating, and every day, Fred's behavior pushed me closer to the edge. Something deep inside me told me there was more to his actions, something he was hiding, and I was determined to find out. I began watching him closely, taking note of his late-night outings and the group of friends he brought into the house. Their laughter, drunkenness, and the chaos they left behind seemed harmless at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something sinister lurking beneath the surface. One night, I decided to monitor him closely. It was just past midnight when I woke up, feeling the urge to use the bathroom. Afterward, I felt thirsty and went to the kitchen for water. On my way, I passed by Fred's study. That was when I heard a low voice muttering something I couldn't understand. Curious and a little scared, I stopped in my tracks and pressed my ear against the door. The muttering continued, joined by other voices speaking in hushed tones. My heart raced. Who was in there with him? What were they doing? Without thinking twice, I pushed the door open. What I saw froze me in place. Fred and his friends were standing in a circle, each wearing long black robes. On the table in front of them was a strange symbol drawn in red, with a small fire flickering in the center. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, and their shocked faces turned toward me all at once. "Fred, so you're a cultist?" I screamed, the words stumbling out of my mouth before I could stop them. Fred's friends exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they left the room without saying a word, leaving me and Fred alone. My heart pounded as I stared at him, unable to believe what I had just seen. "Is it true, Fred?" I shouted. "Are you part of a cult? Is this what you've been hiding from me?" He looked at me, his face cold and unbothered. Then, to my horror, he nodded. "Yes, Susan," he said calmly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I am a member of the Brotherhood of the Black Circle." I staggered back, clutching the wall for support. "Fred, how could you? How could you drag me into this?" Fred stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Listen to me carefully, Susan," he said, his voice low but commanding. "It is an abomination for anyone outside the Brotherhood to discover our secrets. Now that you know, there are rules you must follow." "What rules?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "First," he said, his eyes narrowing, "you must never tell anyone what you saw tonight. Second, you are no longer allowed to leave this house without my permission. Third, you are forbidden to make any calls or contact anyone without my approval. Is that understood?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Fred, you can't be serious. You can't keep me a prisoner in my own home." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "I am very serious, Susan. If you disobey me, there will be consequences. For you, and for anyone you try to involve. Do you understand?" Tears filled my eyes as I realized the depth of the nightmare I had married into. I nodded numbly, too terrified to argue further. Inside, however, my mind was racing. I couldn't live like this. I had to find a way out. But how could I escape someone like Fred? Weeks turned into months, and my life became a shadow of what it once was. I couldn't leave the house, couldn't make calls, and couldn't talk to anyone. Fred ensured I was cut off from the world. Amanda, Fred's sister, hadn't seen or heard from me in so long that she became worried. She tried calling me several times, but Fred forbade me from answering her calls. One day, about a month after Amanda's last attempt to reach me, she showed up at the house unannounced. I was in the living room, dressed in an old oversized shirt, my hair unkempt, and my face pale from exhaustion. Amanda took one look at me and gasped. "Susan, what's going on? Why do you look like this?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Before I could speak, Fred walked into the room, his face a mask of fake calmness. "Amanda, what a surprise," he said. "Fred, what's going on here? Why does Susan look so tattered? And why hasn't she been picking my calls?" Fred sighed heavily and shook his head, putting on his usual act. "Amanda, it's not what you think. Susan has become so lazy these days. She doesn't take care of herself, and I've tried everything to encourage her. And as for the calls, I don't know why she's been ignoring you. Maybe she's just distracted." Amanda turned to me, her eyes filled with confusion. "Susan, is that true?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Fred's cold, warning glare froze me in place. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I looked down at the floor, unable to speak. Amanda was surprised but didn't push further. She stayed for a while, trying to talk to me, but I gave only short, vague answers. After staying with me for some time, she finally left. After months of carrying my child under Fred's resentful eyes, I finally gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I named her Angel. She was my light in the suffocating darkness I lived in. Amanda and Fred's mother came to the house to help during the first few weeks, and for a short while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Amanda adored Angel, and even Fred's mother doted on her. But Fred, he stayed distant, watching us like we were an unwelcome storm that had invaded his home. Whenever Angel cried, Fred would grit his teeth and storm out of the room. If Amanda or his mother asked him to hold her, he would refuse outright. I thought he would eventually come around, that maybe, deep down, he'd grow to love her. But I was wrong. After a few weeks, Amanda and her mother left. It was just me, Angel, and Fred again. That's when the true nightmare began. I knew I couldn't handle everything on my own. Angel was still so little, and Fred's hatred for her made the atmosphere in the house unbearable. To ease the tension, I decided to hire a house help, Esther, a quiet and hardworking young girl. She was good with Angel and helped with chores, making life just a little more manageable. Esther was observant, though she rarely spoke unless spoken to. I often caught her watching Fred whenever he was around, her face etched with concern. One evening, she pulled me aside. "Auntie Susan," she whispered, "is Uncle okay? He's always angry, and the way he looks at Angel." I forced a smile, even though my heart was heavy. "Don't worry, Esther. It's just stress. Everything will be fine." But deep down, I knew nothing was fine. Fred's mood swings were getting worse. He barely spoke to me and wouldn't even look at Angel without scowling. I tried to keep Angel close at all times, afraid of what he might do. One afternoon, the house was quiet. Angel was playing with her toys in the sitting room while I sat on the couch, sorting through some laundry. Fred had been pacing around the house all day, muttering to himself, his anger building with each step. I tried to keep my distance, focusing on Angel and staying out of his way. Esther was in the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch. She had been unusually quiet, sensing the tension in the house. Suddenly, Fred stormed into the sitting room. His face was dark, his eyes wild. In his hand, he held a large knife. My heart dropped. "Fred, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He pointed at Angel, who was giggling as she stacked her blocks. "This child is the reason for all my problems," he shouted. I stood up quickly, positioning myself between him and Angel. "Fred, what are you talking about? She's your daughter." "She's a curse, Susan," he bellowed. "Ever since she came into this house, my life has been falling apart. They are threatening to take everything from me, my money, my power, my status. Everything." "Who are they, Fred? What are you even saying?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, the knife glinting in the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Fred, please," I begged, my voice trembling. "Angel is innocent. She's just a baby. Don't do this." But he didn't stop. "You don't understand. I have no choice. If I don't do this, they'll destroy me. It's either her or me." I glanced back at Angel, who was now looking at us with wide, confused eyes. "Fred, I'll do anything you want," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. "Just leave her out of this. Please." But he was deaf to my cries. At that moment, Esther peeked into the sitting room. Her eyes widened when she saw Fred with the knife. She quickly ducked back into the hallway, her footsteps retreating toward the kitchen. I prayed she would do something, but I had no time to think about her. Fred lunged forward, pushing me aside with surprising force. I screamed as he grabbed Angel. "No, Fred. Please." I shouted, clawing at his arm, trying to pull him away. But it was too late. He raised the knife and plunged it down. Angel's cries stopped instantly. I collapsed onto the floor, my hands trembling as I reached for her. Blood poured on the tiles, staining her little dress. My baby, my angel, was gone. Fred turned to me, his face cold and emotionless. "You should have listened, Susan. Now it's your turn." He started toward me, the knife still dripping with blood. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body was frozen in place. Just then, we heard the loud wail of police sirens outside the house. Fred froze, his eyes darting toward the window. There was a loud knock at the door. "Police! Open up!" In a panic, Fred thrust the knife into my hands and stepped back, a look of fake terror on his face. When the officers burst in, Fred pointed at me. "She killed the baby," he shouted. She's gone crazy and tried to kill me too. I was too shocked to speak, my hands trembling as I held the knife. I later found out that Esther had called the police. She had seen Fred pacing around the house with the knife earlier and sensed something terrible was about to happen. Her quick thinking saved my life, but it wasn't enough to save Angel. Despite Esther's testimony and the clear evidence of Fred's abusive behavior, his wealth and connections turned everything against me. He spun a convincing story about how I had lost my mind after giving birth and painted himself as a grieving father. Fred walked free, and I was convicted of murdering my own child. And now, here I sit in this cold prison cell, reliving that afternoon over and over again. My precious Angel is gone, and the man who killed her is out there, living his life as if nothing happened. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that evil can hide behind a charming smile and kind words. I ignored the signs, the warnings, and the small voices that told me something was wrong. Love blinded me, and it cost me everything. Moral lesson: never ignore the warning signs in a relationship. True love does not hurt, manipulate, or destroy. Always trust your instincts and seek help when something feels wrong. It could save your life. If this video has taught you something valuable, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting and inspiring stories. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.